tell what happened, okay? Because he didn't fall from a toilet, okay?
Did you ask that
I'll
little girl
show you
what happened
porno
up there?
pictures with
Yeah, we talked
massive
to her.
hemorrhaging, massive hemorrhaging.
Oh,
So deep into the brain that it's physically impossible. Not to mention he had a torn anus, and his penis was black and blue from someone ripping at it.
no.
How does that happen
That
from a
damn sure
fall?
wasn't for me.
Because
Dude, that damn,
you're
I didn't know all
also
that.
charged with sexual battery on
Are
a
you
child.
serious?
Yeah, that's part of the charges.
Yeah.
That's part of the medical findings. Is besides the massive head injury was damage to his
Mutilation to
and
From how, I'm saying the damage to his anus from when though?
in
general, just in general.
Well, the penis was fresh. You could see there was
Damn
some.
sure I do that, sir. I don't mess with no little kids' penis.
Okay.
I'm not no fat.
They see where we're coming from
Yeah,
right
I do
now.
actually.
Okay,
I do.
We have a
I
kid.
didn't know all that.
Yeah, we have a kid with a major head injury.
Okay, so what are they saying the head injury came from?
What kind of darkness could lead to the tragic death of a 2-year-old child, leaving an entire community in mourning? In April 7, 2010, while Whitney was at work, Padgett was responsible for Aaden's care. Palm Bay, Florida, mourned the heartbreaking loss of 23-month-old Aaden Batista. His life was abruptly and violently ended, leaving behind a grieving community and a mother seeking answers. The individual responsible for this heinous act was Jason Padgett, a 28-year-old man with a criminal history. He faced charges including third-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. Despite prior convictions for robbery, grand theft, forgery, and fleeing a law enforcement officer, Padgett had been entrusted with the care of Aaden, the son of his girlfriend, Whitney Flower. That evening, Aaden was found unresponsive and was rushed to Holmes Regional Medical Center in Melbourne. Due to the severity of his injuries, he was transferred to Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children in Orlando, where he succumbed to his injuries on April 8, 2010. An autopsy revealed severe head trauma consistent with blunt force impact. There were also indications of possible sexual abuse and evidence of prior injuries, suggesting a history of mistreatment. Witnesses reported observing Padgett physically abusing Aaden in the weeks leading up to his death. Despite these observations, authorities were not notified in time to prevent the tragedy. There is no documented evidence indicating that Whitney Flower was aware of the abuse or that she concealed Padgett's actions. Similarly, available sources do not substantiate claims that Aaden's biological father, Jeffrey Batista, had reported abuse to authorities or was seeking custody at the time. Aaden Batista had the sort of light-hearted joy only a 2-year-old can possess. He was a small child with big eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him, his curiosity often leading him to explore the world with a sense of wonder. His smile was easy to spot, lighting up any room he entered. Those who knew him recall his tendency to wander off with his favorite toy in tow, a stuffed animal that he treated as his constant companion, always by his side through the simplest moments of his day. But Aaden's short life was caught in a struggle that was far beyond his understanding, and the people closest to him were entangled in cycles that would have profound consequences. Whitney Flowers, Aaden's mother, was a woman shaped by past struggles, caught in a storm of addiction and unstable relationships. The chaos of her life often made it difficult to see beyond the immediate. Her relationship with Jason Padgett was defined by volatility, a mix of tenderness and aggression that never truly settled into a safe or supportive place. For Whitney, her deep-seated battles with substance use often clouded her ability to protect her son in the way he needed. Those who loved Aaden could see the contradiction in her. She was a mother who clearly adored her son but was pulled away from him by her personal demons. Jason Padgett, meanwhile, represented a darker force in Aaden's life. A man with a history of criminal behavior and anger issues, his presence in their home was anything but benign. He had served time for various crimes, his violent tendencies manifesting in episodes of aggression that shook the foundation of their home. While there were rare moments when Jason showed affection for Aaden, they were fleeting and often overshadowed by the controlling, abusive behavior that seemed to define his relationship with Whitney. The dynamic between the two adults created an unstable environment where Aaden's needs took a backseat. Aaden's biological father, Jason Batista, had long been out of the picture in terms of his relationship with Whitney. They had separated due to Whitney's addiction and personal choices that Jeffrey couldn't reconcile with being an active, present father. But his absence didn't mean he was absent from Aaden's heart. Jeffrey was determined to play a role in his son's life. He made visits to see Aaden as often as he could, offering stability and love. He would read stories to Aaden, take him to the park, and make the most of their time together. Jeffrey had hopes of one day being able to gain custody of Aaden, driven by a fierce desire to protect his son from the unstable environment he was caught in. For Jeffrey, the challenge was monumental. He fought for custody, seeking to give Aaden a better life. But the systems that should have helped, Child Protective Services, the courts, the network of support, failed to act swiftly enough. He felt the weight of not being able to save his son from the inevitable, and that regret haunted him. In the days leading up to Aaden's death, Jeffrey's efforts to intervene had intensified, but he was too late. The events that led to Aaden Batista's tragic death unfolded with a shocking inevitability, a series of missteps and decisions that, in hindsight, seem almost impossible to fathom. April 7, 2010, began like any other day for Aaden, his bright eyes full of life, his giggles echoing in the background as he played with his favorite stuffed bear. But, unknowns to those around him, the day would end in a way that would change the lives of those who loved him forever. It was a typical scenario. Whitney Flowers, though always doing her best to keep her life together, was once again caught in the grip of instability. She had made a choice to leave Aaden in the care of Jason Padgett, her boyfriend, the man who had shown violent tendencies in the past, but whom she still chose to trust despite the damage their relationship had caused. Aaden was familiar with Jason, having spent time with him before, and while Jason's outbursts were unpredictable, Whitney convinced herself that this time would be different, that Aaden would be fine. But deep down, a nagging voice, one that Whitney had long ignored, whispered that leaving Aaden with Jason wasn't safe. She had seen the anger that simmered beneath the surface, the way his temperament would shift without warning, turning from a quiet man to a fury, capable of terrifying rage. Still, she rationalized her decision, distracted by the weight of her own personal struggles and the pressure of trying to keep up appearances. After all, Aaden had been in Jason's presence before without anything catastrophic happening. Maybe this time, it would be okay. But it wasn't. As the hours stretched on that afternoon, the moments of quiet tension escalated. Jason was alone with Aaden, their relationship strained by the silent undercurrents of unresolved conflict. Aaden, still only a child, had no way of understanding the environment he was caught in, let alone the volatility that could explode at any moment. No one knows exactly what set it off. There were no witnesses to what happened behind the closed door of that small, cluttered apartment. But in a sudden, inexplicable fit of rage, Jason's darker impulses took over. In an instant, Aaden was injured, his small body becoming the victim of that raw, violent outburst. The first signs of something being terribly wrong came when Whitney returned, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had left her son in a precarious situation. But what she was greeted with was far worse than she could have ever imagined. Aaden was unconscious, his breathing shallow, his face bruised and battered. The child she had kissed goodbye that morning was now a mere shell of the energetic, happy boy he had once been. She was paralyzed with horror. It was a nightmare she couldn't have prepared herself for. In a frantic panic, Whitney rushed to call 911, her voice shaking with terror as she struggled to explain the severity of the situation. The operator's calm tone contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Aaden, with his fragile little body, was slipping away, and every second felt like an eternity. It wasn't just his injuries that shook Whitney to the core, it was the realization that she had made a choice, a decision that had set this whole chain of events in motion. Jason, for his part, was in shock, the rage that had clouded his judgment now replaced with a cold, detached silence. In the immediate aftermath, he didn't seem to grasp the full consequences of his actions. His mind, clouded by a history of anger and violence, struggled to comprehend the irreversible damage he had caused. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and while his exterior remained composed, inside, a different kind of turmoil was brewing. Emergency responders arrived at the scene, their swift actions revealing the gravity of Aaden's condition. But despite their best efforts, the damage was done. As Aaden was rushed to the hospital, Whitney's world seemed to fracture before her eyes. Was this the moment she had feared? Was her son truly gone, taken by the very person she had trusted to care for him? Her mind raced with the guilt, the nagging sense that she should have done more, that she should have seen this coming. The questions would haunt her for the rest of her life. How had things gone so wrong? In the sterile, harsh lights of the emergency room, Aaden's fate was sealed. The doctors did what they could, but the severity of his injuries left them with little hope. What followed was a devastating confirmation: Aaden Batista was pronounced dead, and the tragedy was no longer just a horrific accident. It was the painful result of a toxic relationship, a shattered family, and the violent, uncontrollable impulses of a man who had been entrusted with a child's safety. This was not just the end of Aaden's life, it was the start of a long, complicated journey for those left behind. Whitney, torn between the love she had for her son and the betrayal she had experienced at the hands of Jason, found herself at a crossroads. Would she ever be able to reconcile with the fact that her choices had led to this moment? Could she forgive herself, or would she be left to live with the consequences of a decision that would haunt her for years to come? The news of Aaden's death sent ripples of disbelief through all who knew him. However, the autopsy and medical findings soon painted a harrowing picture of the violence that had claimed his life. The truth behind Aaden's injuries was not only devastating, it was chilling in its brutality. When Aaden's body was examined, the extent of his injuries became tragically clear. His head had suffered catastrophic trauma, revealing multiple brain hemorrhages caused by blunt force. The damage to his young brain was far beyond what an accident could explain. The injuries were consistent with an assault, forceful blows that left his small body unable to recover. The medical examiner's findings were stark and unrelenting. The damage was not an isolated incident. There were signs of prior abuse scattered across Aaden's body, bruises, cuts, and scratches, each one telling the story of a child who had been subjected to cruelty over time. These were not random injuries, they pointed to a history of neglect and abuse, a pattern of violence that had persisted in the shadows, unnoticed and unchecked. What was most unsettling, however, was the realization that these injuries had not been inflicted in a moment of panic or a single outburst. They were the result of deliberate, sustained aggression. Aaden had been subjected to an environment of fear and pain for far too long. It was clear that this wasn't the first time he had been hurt. And, as the investigation unfolded, it became equally clear that those who were supposed to protect him had failed to do so, ultimately leading to his untimely death. This revelation, painful as it was, sparked an even deeper wave of reflection. Whitney, who had placed her trust in Jason to care for her son, now found herself grappling with an unbearable truth. She had made a choice to leave Aaden in his care, a choice that, in hindsight, proved disastrous. She knew, in a distant corner of her heart, that something was wrong. But there had always been the hope, however small, that things would get better, that Jason would change. Those hopes were shattered when the autopsy confirmed the horrors Aaden had endured. The sense of helplessness and guilt that overwhelmed Whitney was suffocating. She couldn't shake the question, what could I have done differently? Could she have sensed the danger before it was too late? The fact that Aaden had been exposed to such repeated violence over time was a nightmare she couldn't wake from. And yet, it was clear that the cycle of abuse had been allowed to continue unchecked for far too long. Jason Padgett, the man entrusted with Aaden's safety, now stood at the heart of the investigation. The autopsy report, coupled with statements from those close to Aaden, revealed the horrifying extent of his actions. It was no longer a matter of neglect or chance. Jason had been an active participant in the abuse that had killed the child. The past was littered with warning signs, episodes of anger, volatile outbursts, and troubling behavior that now seemed impossible to ignore. But in the wake of Aaden's death, there was no longer any room for denial. Jason had crossed a line that could not be undone. As the case turned into a homicide investigation, the evidence of Jason's cruelty grew harder to dismiss. His indifference to Aaden's suffering became chillingly clear. His lack of remorse and the cold, calculated way he interacted with investigators confirmed the growing suspicion. Jason had known exactly what he was doing. The fact that he had no hesitation in causing harm to the child who had once trusted him was a revelation that left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. Whitney's heartbreak was compounded by the recognition that she had been blind to the danger that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. As detectives delved deeper into the circumstances surrounding Aaden's death, all roads led to Jason Padgett. His past was riddled with violence, each incident forming a disturbing pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for far too long. Jason wasn't a first-time offender. His criminal record stretched back years, painting the portrait of a man with a history of violent outbursts and a disregard for the law. Armed robbery, grand theft, domestic violence, and, most disturbingly, child abuse. Each charge had been a red flag, a warning of what he was capable of. Yet, despite these past convictions, he had continued to move through life largely unchallenged, always finding a way to manipulate those around him. The investigation uncovered even more troubling revelations. In the weeks leading up to Aaden's death, several witnesses had seen the child being mistreated. A neighbor recalled hearing Aaden's cries late into the night, followed by Jason's enraged voice booming through the thin walls. Another witness, a former friend of Jason's, had seen bruises on Aaden's body but hesitated to report them, assuming someone else would step in. It was a hesitation that haunted them now. One of the most damning accounts came from a family acquaintance who had seen Jason grab Aaden roughly by the arm, yanking him with such force that the toddler let out a startled cry. The witness had confronted Jason about his behavior, only to be met with cold indifference. "He's fine," Jason had muttered dismissively before walking away. With each testimony, the case against Jason grew stronger. The authorities no longer saw Aaden's death as an unfortunate accident. It was a brutal act of violence, carried out by a man who had spent years evading justice. When officers finally arrived at Jason Padgett's residence with an arrest warrant, he didn't resist. There was no grand attempt to flee, no outburst of rage. Instead, he remained eerily calm, his expression unreadable as he was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. It was as if he had known this moment was coming. The charges were severe: first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and neglect. Each one carried weight, ensuring that, for the first time, Jason would be held fully accountable. As he was led into custody, the community that had once turned a blind eye to his violence could no longer ignore the reality: Aaden's death was preventable. The system had failed him. And now, the man responsible would finally face the consequences. But for those who had loved Aaden, the arrest brought little relief. Justice, no matter how swift, could never undo the loss of a child who had deserved so much more. Aaden's father, Jason Batista, had stayed away from the spotlight throughout much of the trial. But in a written statement, he shared his heartbreak and regret. "I wish I could have protected him," he wrote. "I wish things had been different. I will never stop missing him." Now, with the trial over and Jason Padgett sentenced, he turned his focus toward ensuring that no other parent would experience the same helplessness he had felt. That determination led to the creation of Aaden's Law, a proposal designed to protect children caught in legal battles between parents, particularly those unaware of the risks posed by a caregiver's violent past. Jeffrey fought tirelessly to bring attention to the gaps in the system, highlighting the fact that many unmarried fathers lacked equal parental rights, often leaving their children vulnerable. He spoke before local lawmakers, joined forces with advocacy groups, and shared his story with national media, refusing to let Aaden's death be just another tragic case. Aaden had no voice, he told reporters at a press conference. "I'm here to make sure that changes, for him and for every child like him." The law aimed to grant unmarried fathers the right to challenge custody decisions in cases where their child's safety was at risk. It also proposed stricter background checks for individuals with histories of domestic violence and child abuse, ensuring that courts considered past behavior as a determining factor in custody rulings. Jeffrey knew the battle would be long, but he had already lost the most important fight of his life. This was one he refused to walk away from. Meanwhile, across Palm Bay, another initiative took shape in Aaden's honor. Aaden's Playhouse was more than just a playground, it was a promise. Built on the grounds of the house at Palm Bay Church, it stood as a tribute to a child whose life had been stolen too soon. The project was funded through community donations, many from families who had never met Aaden but felt connected to his story. Volunteers gathered to bring it to life, each hammer strike and brush of paint filled with quiet determination. On the day of its unveiling, Whitney Flowers stood before a crowd of supporters, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Aaden loved to play," she said. "This is how I want to remember him, laughing, running, being a kid. No child should have that stolen from them." The playground featured bright swings, colorful slides, and a shaded area where parents could sit and watch their children. At its entrance, a plaque bore Aaden's name alongside a simple but powerful message: "Let them be safe. Let them be loved." For Jeffrey, Whitney, and the community that had rallied around them, Aaden's legacy was no longer just a story of loss. It was a call to action, a reminder that even in tragedy, change was possible. If you were in this position, fighting for justice, for change, for a voice that was taken too soon, what would you do? How would you fight to protect the ones you love? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know how you feel about Aaden's story. Have you or someone you know faced challenges in the legal system when it comes to child protection? Let's start a conversation and raise awareness together. And if you found this story impactful, please like, subscribe, and share to help us spread the message. Every share brings more attention to the fight for justice and child safety. Your support makes a difference.